Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm delighted to introduce Season 5 of the podcast and another opportunity to take a peek inside the minds of some truly inspirational teachers. We're going to explore teacher development, mental health, evidence-informed practice, assessment, and much more. But first, we have the inimitable Clare Sealy and a discussion based around her extensive experience of leadership in a range of contexts. Before we begin, I want to take a second to remind you about all the ways you can engage with Thinking Deeply About Primary Education. We have the YouTube channel with supplementary videos on a range of themes, a Discord server where like-minded individuals keen to engage with deep thinking about education gather, and links can be found in the show notes. And finally, it would be fantastic if you could take a second to review the podcast wherever you listen so we can spread our reach further and wider than ever before. I think that's enough for me, so without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Clare Sealy. It's great to have you here, Clare. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Now, we always begin with our guests in numbers to get a feel for who they are and where they're from. So my first question to you is years as a teacher.
Well, it depends if you count me as being a teacher now. Because for the last 3 years, I've been working as a civil servant in what's Guernsey's equivalent of Department of Education. So I still think I'm a teacher. So it's either 33 years or 30 years, depending on whether you think I still count as a teacher. I mean, I'm still a teacher in my soul. Some people might say, no, you're not. And some people might say, well, when you're a head teacher, you're not a teacher either. So in which case it's like, I don't know, 8 years or something. But yeah, let's call it 33.
Yeah, I think 33. I think once a teacher, always a teacher, plus you're heavily involved in education and a lot of the same things. So yeah, I think 33. Years as a head teacher?
22.
First year group taught?
4.
Last year group taught?
Well, as a class teacher, 2. I mean, as a head teacher, I taught groups. Yeah, generally year 6. But yeah, my last group that I taught was 4 kids in year 6 who were the absolute lowest in maths. And they were great.
Until you finished with them, and then they weren't anymore.
I don't think they were that, but they were a hell of a lot better than they were. But yeah.
Most important year group?
Yeah, no, I'm going to pass. I'm gonna go no. Or they're all important.
Very diplomatic. And
but they are. I mean, you know.
Favorite year group?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I mean, they all have their quirks, their benefits, and disadvantages of all of them. I mean, like I really like year 2. When I taught year 2, and I particularly like them after Christmas, because up until the first term, some of them are still not quite joined. Well, you know, this is like early years people go, that's really terrible what you're saying, Claire, but they're not quite joined the planet of education yet. You know, they're still at that very random thing where you're going, so can anyone tell me what this shape is? And they put their hands up and they go, my grandma's got a cat or something.
I get
something magical happens after Christmas. It's like, now you're with me. Anyway, so yeah, I really like year 2, but then you do have, you know, that there's the old independence versus being a bit too independent and cheeky and naughty side of things. So, you know, year 2, they're not so independent. Year 6, they're great. You can have really good discussions with them, but then they can be a bit too independent and want to plow their own furrow in a way that isn't always the way you want them to go. So yeah, they all have their benefits and downsides.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you are the head of education improvement for the States of Guernsey, an author, ex-head teacher of St. Matthias School in Tower Hamlets. Tell us about your journey and how you got here.
Okay, but you'll have to say, stop, Claire, you're going on too long, okay? Because I can go. And then, in 1963, I was born. No, yeah, okay. So I'll try and I'll try and do highlights. So how I got to be a head, which was a bit random, was I wasn't a deputy head teacher. I was part of the senior leadership team, and I went on maternity leave to have my first kid. And at the same time, the head teacher had been there a long time, left, and there was a new head teacher, and I kept on getting I was on maternity leave, but I kept on getting phone calls from my friends going, oh my God, this man is crazy. He's mad. He's incompetent, whatever. And I thought, yeah, they're just finding it hard because the last head was really charismatic and nice. Everyone loved them. They just finding change hard. But actually, the more I heard, like, he absolutely was totally incompetent, over promoted. So cut long story short, I went back from maternity leave. So that was in September when he came. I went back in January. And I'd asked the outgoing head teacher when she was doing the year groups, can I go in year 2? Because I taught that before. I'm going to have a baby. It's going to be hard. Anyway, I didn't really get to teach year 2 very long because people were leaving because he was so difficult to work with. And I ended up at the half term, the February half term, being phoned up by the diocese church school saying, Mr. So-and-so is going. You're going to be acting, because the deputy had gone. The deputy just couldn't bear working with him. You're going to be acting head. So I went from not being a deputy head, coming back thinking I was going to have a relatively easy year because I had this tiny little baby, to being head teacher. And then I was there for 22 years. So I did that. So yeah, I was thrown into it at the deep end. And one good thing about taking over from somebody who's really terrible, the great thing about that is that everyone thinks you're marvelous. Like, it doesn't matter obviously it's a really steep learning curve for me, but everyone thinks you're marvelous because you're better than he was. So that was really good. Anyway, so that was there for 22 years. And then my kids, time moves on, 22 years you can get. I've talked about my kid being born. He was now an adult, and my other one was about to go to university. And I didn't have the ties with my children being adults tying me to London anymore. They were not at school anymore. And it was like, I wanted to do something new. So I was doing an RM about what to do. I had thought at the time I was doing quite a lot of speaking at conferences, and my blog had taken off and everything. And I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a freelance consultant. Thank God I didn't, because 2019 was not a good year to start off as an education consultant because didn't know COVID was coming. So thank God that didn't happen. But actually this job in Guernsey came up and it seemed really interesting and very different from working in Tower Hamlets and living in Hackney and inner city London. And I applied for it and got the job, and here I am. So that's the potted history of how I ended up here.
Yeah, it's action-packed too. I think we'll get to, the similarities and differences between those two main leadership roles you've held.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really interesting that we're going to focus on leadership, and actually there may be something at all stages of leadership, I think. And so, first question, what is leadership?
Okay, I'm going to use, and I know it's a cliche, but the metaphor of the journey, but I just think I can't think of a better way of describing it. So as a leader, you provide direction, like, where are we going? What's the destination? And you might be loads of people in your organization who agree on the destination. There might be some people who don't really, but you set the destination. Then you also, so you've got a map with a destination, and then you decide the route we're going to follow to get to that destination. And that's so it's about planning. And at the operational sort of tactical side of leadership, I think, is overlooked because it's not the glamorous, sexy, hey, I'm this motivating, charismatic person. No, this is the nuts and bolts of let's plan, let's organize, the operational managerial side of it. So you're going to have a route and a map. Then you've got to encourage people to follow you, to follow the journey on the map. And that's fine when it's all great, but it's following it even when the terrain is hard, even when it's 40 degrees like it is for you in England right now, or when it's uphill and when it's boggy, or when it's hard, we're still doing it. We're still going to keep on going, even when it's really hard and challenging. But last of all, it's also responsive. So like, we're not so wedded to the map to our route on the map that we can't change it if needs be. So we might need to deviate. We're still going to the same destination, but we might need to find a workaround and change how we're going to do it when necessary, because we're going to be responsive to information in front of us. So those will be that's leadership is, it's, you know, providing direction, providing plans, providing motivation, and being responsive to the facts on the ground.
I think that's really important, you know, and you're talking about the nuts and bolts. That's the bit that normally gets missed out whenever you hear inspirational speakers talking. But actually, that's the bit that if you do that right, then everything else sort of follows on from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember. There's a famous quote, which I can't remember who said it, but you know, there's a lot of love in detail, and you can be wonderful and, you know, inspirational, whatever, but you do actually need to get the plans right. And actually, when I don't know, like you know, if you're a head teacher or whatever, and you're going away for the day, you know, to do a talk or whatever, and you're handing over to your deputy to run the place, or you know, I remember the first time I was left in charge of a school. I mean, actually, it's the operational. You're not going to suddenly, you know, have a new vision, are you? You know, you're covering the school for a day. You actually need to know how do I get a supply teacher? What happens if a kid gets really sick? I need to call an ambulance. You know, who's in charge of safeguarding, or who, you know, if who can I call if there's a thing? What do I do if an angry parent comes in? What, you know, it's all of those sort of operational things that you need to get right. I mean, obviously, there's more than just that. You can't just have a school ticking over like that. I mean, you do need that. That's a sort of minimum. Maybe it's the phonics of leadership. Number facts of leadership. You know, there's a minimum that you need to do, and then you need to do some more on top of that. But you can't, and it's sometimes that's sort of overlooked and derided because it's not sexy. It's not, you know, there's no glory in that. It's hard graft, and some of it's quite boring.
Yeah, I think that anything worth doing is normally hard work, you know, but worth the effort in the end. You know, I'm thinking about my current head. He and I have known each other quite a while, and whenever we're left, we maybe weren't working together, but we were left and responsible for schools. We're like, okay, let's make sure every class has got a teacher and that they stay there for the whole of the school day. And if we do that, it's been a success. Yes, but you know, and then once that's all in place, obviously you can build on it. What are your guiding principles for your own leadership, and do they differ depending on the scale of the role?
I think number one is worry about being genuinely good, not looking good. And I think that can't be said enough. That we've got, I mean, you can say, you can blame Ofsted, but I think if it wasn't Ofsted, it would be something else or something else or something else. Because I remember the time before Ofsted, and I don't think it was any different then, that it's not about looking good to some external audience, be that, you know, parents, Ofsted, local authority, the map, whatever. It's about being genuinely good. And that means, you know, we're going back to that thing about destination. You have to know what your destination really is, and being true to that, rather than I think we've got ourselves into this, or lots of schools, or maybe the system as a whole, into performative school improvement. There's certain, it's not genuine. It's like there's certain things and rituals you do, and if you do that, I mean, that's what performative means. If you perform certain things, then you're good. You do these things, you pull this lever, you do that, you do this ritual, whether it's marking or lesson observations or data or coaching or blah 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 blah. If I do this, I've got this checklist, I've done all the things, I've done everything everyone told me to do, so therefore I'm good. No flies on me, I can't be held up for criticism because I've done all the things. So yeah, without a real understanding of the why. So yeah, do good, don't try. It's not about looking good. And the other thing with that is, I'd say, as well as knowing your craft, and there's lots of research about leadership being specific rather than generic. So, you know, it's not like sometimes you get books like learning from football managers and translating that into being against this charismatic thing. Actually, I mean, you can probably learn a bit, from a football manager, but actually, if you want to know how to run a school, you need to know about teaching and behavior management and that side of things. There's a lot of technical stuff you need to know in order to do that well, sort of specific to that domain. So you need to know your craft, but you also need to know yourself. I think this is important because lots of us, we've talked about direction and purpose and values, and lots of us go into teaching with some sort of moral purpose to make a difference and to do good and whatever. And that's great, but there's a shadow side to that. Because if our ego is bound up with doing this because we're going to make a difference, and then it's quite hard to make a difference, actually. It's like one thing to say, yeah, I'm going to go in there and all the children will smile and glow and be wonderful and magnificent and fantastic, but actually it's hard and doesn't always work. And what happens when this vision is thwarted, if you don't understand your own motivation and where that's coming from, because it's not actually about you. It's not about you making a difference. It's about a difference being made, and you may fall into that, but it's not actually about you. But if you don't do that work and know yourself, then one of three things or all three will happen. So one, you might want to make this difference. You work yourself into the ground. You don't have any boundaries on how hard you work, because if you're trying to do these wonderful things like combat poverty and end racism through education, then how can I possibly have a weekend off? A weekend off combating racism? How very dare I? You know what I mean? So you can sort of destroy yourself or your family through overwork, or despise yourself for weakness. So you can do that. Or you might project it all onto, especially if you're a leader, we heard about toxic schools, that you may be this selfless, heroic, noble person, but you're let down by these awful staff you worked with, who don't understand the cause and aren't as dedicated as you, and so you might become a really toxic leader who is not nice to your staff. Or you might have children who are resistant to being saved. So you're got this savior complex. I'm not saying everyone's totally pathologically crazy, but you might have an element of that in you, and you might have children who are quite resistant to being saved and don't want to be saved. Thank you very much, and whatever. And then that can make you either feel very depressed and useless, or you can actually be furious with those children for refusing to be saved by you. So all of those things, you need to know yourself and know what's motivating you, and know what's healthy about what's motivating you and what's not so healthy about motivating you, and learn how to divest yourself a bit of ego. I had a colleague who used to be my deputy head many years ago, and we used to joke that we both secretly thought that at some point there'd be a statue in Bethnal Green where we taught, a statue to how wonderful we are for saving the poor children of Bethnal Green. And that is rubbish. So you need to put away that sort of hero savior complex and see it for what it is. And otherwise it will get perverted in one of those ways, or two of them, or all three of them.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because our sense of self-esteem, when it's too tied up in what we do day to day, when, like you say, when things go wrong, that's when you start really have an issue, probably where a lot of the burnout statistics might come from. I know workload isn't solved, but certainly the pressure people put on themselves, and certainly I've put them on myself in the past, definitely comes from that.
And if your self-esteem is bound up with being successful at work, then it's obviously we all want to be successful. There's nothing wrong in that, but if it's too bound up in that your whole sense of self, and you don't have a sense of your own self-worth just as a person, then you won't be able to sort of roll with the punches, or whatever the phrase is. Is that the right phrase? Anyway, you won't, when things are hard, you'll be less resilient to deal with them. So, because actually you have value beyond your job, as important and wonderful as your job is. So I was this savior person who came in and put the school right, and it was all wonderful. I was really young. I'd only been teaching, I think it was 7 years or something. I think it was 34. So I was a really young head teacher, and it was like, yay, Claire, brilliant. And then a few years later, actually I hadn't realized at the time it had gone well, because I had a good team around me, and I hadn't really realized how much of it was them, not so much me. And then they went off and had babies, got their jobs, everything like that. And I had a rash of mass pregnancy, and the school didn't have any teachers. It was really difficult. So that thing about have a teacher in every class, we didn't really have that. That was quite tricky. And anyway, the local authority suddenly decided, oh no, she's not this wonderkind, she's terrible, she's really bad, and were very very negative. And at that point, that was a real pivotal moment for me, because I had this big sort of dark night of the soul, I suppose you'd call it. And I had to realize, like, what am I here for? I'm not actually here to be lauded as this wonderful person. I'm here to do a job, and sometimes it's going to be tough, and sometimes people are going to tell me I'm not doing very well, and maybe I'm not doing very well at the moment. And what's the right thing to do when people are telling me I'm not doing very well? Like, can they get someone better than me to do it? And if they can, fair enough, I should walk and that other person. But actually, they can't get someone better than me. So therefore, I'm going to have to stay in this really awkward, uncomfortable place where people are being very critical, and bear with it. And I'm not getting any praise. In fact, I'm getting criticism that's really not deserved. But I got praise that wasn't deserved. So now I'm getting the criticism that is deserved. So suck it up and bear with it. And then, do you know what? It's horrible. It was really horrible at the time. But a few months later, all my teachers had gone off to have babies, all came back, and it was all fine. And then we had Ofsted, and it's like, see, we got good local authority. You were thinking we're going to get special measures. See, I told you it was just that my teachers are all off, and now we're all fine. So it was fine, but I learned a really valuable lesson about myself and my motivations for doing it. So yeah, know yourself as well as know your craft and know your school. Talk about the scale of things. I mean, I've gone from one extreme to the other, and I don't think the principles, because you asked about principles, I don't think the principles are different. It's just how you enact them is different. So I went from one elementary school, 240 kids, to like, I'm trying to work out, I think we have about 8,000. That's a bit different. So it's just like communicating. The bigger the organization, the harder it is to communicate, obviously, but also the more other people you're independent. Like, as a one elementary head teacher, you're a team, but actually you're really in charge. You're really, really in charge in a way that you're maybe even in the 3 elementary school is less so, but you are really, really in charge. Whereas here, I'm not the top person for a start, but even if I was, you are so dependent on others. I mean, you have to be. You cannot. First of all, there's the senior leadership team within the education office. Then there's also all the head teachers in all the schools, all the 19 schools. Then there's all their senior leadership teams, and there's their middle leadership teams, and then there's the teachers, and so on and so on and so forth. So communicating, that whole thing about being good rather than looking good. So it's about how to do things and why we're doing those things. So, what is good? How do you do it? Why we're doing it? The more people you have, the more complicated that is.
Probably particularly difficult for teachers as well, because we like to have control so much.
Mm-hmm.
We're forged in the classroom, our own little dominion, and then we have to stop. I can imagine that's quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and Peps McCree stuff. So it talks about motivation, and I think this is why that domain-specific stuff is important. So we can talk about motivation and literature, and that is not just in teaching. Peps McCree stuff on that is really interesting. But it says, if you want to motivate people, you need to secure success. Well, that's fine, but you need to secure success in the domain that you're doing. So this is securing success. I mean, he's using it for children, but you can do it for adults as well. If you want to secure success for teachers, you have to know how to help them be successful. So CPD in its broadest sense. You need to, so you can't do that. You can't help them teach maths well if you don't know at least some sort of idea what teaching maths well looks like. Even if you're not going to do it, the head of maths is going to do it, your maths leader is going to do it. But you have to have some sort of idea of what that might look like. Run routines, the next one in his Peps McCree's 5 things. Make systems easy to follow. Well, again, you need to know what what sort of things will work. Nudge norms, so elevating the desirability of norms. That probably is generic. Tell people what you do want rather than what you don't want. But again, you have to know what you want, and that's specific. Build belonging. Yeah, that's probably generic. Build common purpose. Boost buy-in, and all of those things are true for children, but they're also true for staff. So, but again, the bigger the organisation, the more moving parts there are, the more complicated it is.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. The idea that there's a lot of similarity between teaching and school leadership. I think a lot of principles overlap.
Yeah, in fact, there's a talk I did ages ago, years and years ago, and we talk about responsive teaching, moving away from marking and into responsive teaching. And I did this talk I did is about, responsive teaching is also responsive leadership. And in the same way that we need to, as a leader, as a teacher, you're looking and seeing what's going on, and you're getting feedback, not for the kids, but for yourself. So there's assessment for teaching. So this AFL, I think that's a misnomer. A lot of it is not AFL, it's AFT, assessment for teaching. But there's also assessment for leadership. And that feedback, it's like, I'm going to give you feedback. Actually, the feedback's for yourself or for your other leaders. And if, say, you've got an initiative to, I don't know, improve teaching and punctuation, and if people aren't doing it, then why aren't they doing it? Well, they're probably not doing it because they're feckless. They're probably not doing it because you didn't explain it properly in the first place. I mean, you might have thought you did. You really might have thought you did. But it's like saying, that's like say a teacher saying, but I taught them about evaporation. Yeah, but I don't know it. So it doesn't matter what you taught them. Did they learn it? In the same way with teachers, you might have taught them about, I don't know, do nows or lining up in the corridor or teaching full stops or whatever it is. If they're not doing it, then you need to teach them again. So you might need to teach them again because you didn't explain it properly, or it might be you need to revise it because it's fading, because there's so many initiatives in schools, aren't there? And sometimes we introduce another initiative and we don't actually say, that thing I told you a couple of years ago, that was, stop doing that. I've changed my mind. That we never are actually officially not often do we officially bury an initiative and say stop doing that. So teachers think, they might not think this out loud, but they might just think, oh, this is the same as all those other initiatives that just gently fade and die. But if we actually want to keep on doing it, no, that sort of do now stuff is no, that wasn't just a whim, that wasn't just a one-hit wonder. I actually do want you to carry on doing that, until I say not to do. So, we might need to go back to the why, we might need to go back to the how, so we might need to remind them how to do it. We might need to help people practice things until it becomes more automatic and habitual. And then we might need to check. So all of these things that I would say the same for as a teacher, for your assessment for learning, assessment for teaching rather, I'd say it's assessment for leadership as well. So you might want to check in. Is this thing that I think's embedded, is it really embedded? Is it so sort of retrieval practice type thing? Is it like 3 months later, is it still happening? 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, do we still really get it, the how and the why? And we should do, because it should be habitual. But even then, so you might move on to something new, you'll have newcomers, and they might not understand the how and the why. I don't know what question that was answering, but that was my ramble about responsive leadership.
And the thread's pretty clear to see, from your guiding principles to what those principles actually look like on the ground. So it makes a whole lot of sense. When you move into a new leadership role, be it at a new school or a new trust, for instance, how would you spend your first 100 days?
Well, I'm going to hedge my bets again and say it depends, because it really depends on what the place is like as to how you have to be. So ages ago, I don't think how long ago it was now, but anyway, there was something called the Leadership Program for Serving Head Teachers, which I went on. That was brilliant, and they best CPD I've had, I think, and they introduced us to the work of Daniel Goleman, and he says that a good leader has the repertoire of all of these styles. It's not that any of them are bad or any of them are good. Some are better than others, some of them are more flexible than others, but you need to have all of those. So those are the authoritative, affiliative, coaching, democratic, pace setting, and coercive. There is 5. So coercive is great in a turnaround situation. The building's on fire. go, 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 go. We're not going to sit around and debate it. You know, we're just going to go. So school in special measures are going to be ching, and you're going to be very directive. And but you know, it has limited application. And then pace setting, which is when you set a really high performance bar, and I can do this, you can do it too. Let's all be like me. I'm wonderful. You be wonderful too. And that works if you've got a really high performing team and they all rise to the challenge. But again, it's not one you'll probably use very often. But the ones that came out the strongest and that we use the most were the authoritative one, which is so not authoritarian, authoritative. So you know where you're going, you know, you have your vision, you know how to get there, and you're getting other people to come along with you, and you're not being highly directive. You're letting them take risks and sort of you know, you've given them the broad direction, but you're helping them make their own way of doing that. But alongside that is coaching, because I think, you know, if you're too like, hey, here is the broad direction, you figure it out. That's fine for some people. Like, you know, autonomy can be good, but it needs to be a manageable and achievable autonomy. And, you know, not too much autonomy too quickly is not good. There's also, you know, autonomy needs to be earned. So if in our school, you know, our special measure school or whatever, yeah, well, you know, you have to be at a certain standard before I can give it to you, before you can have that autonomy. But also, you know, the other end is like, I'm not just going to give you autonomy as this unalloyed good if you're not ready for it. It's not achievable for you. So it's something that you can fade out. It's a bit like with children, you know, you have to model and scaffold things, and then you take away those supports over time. So that's where the coaching comes in. So that's a very rambling answer to say, well, it depends what the school is like. So, and how much you know about the school or the trust or whatever, how much you know about it, so that you know whether it's which of that repertoire of styles, which ones you should be using where. So you need to do a lot of finding out, getting under the skin of wherever you are. So, you know, obviously that's talking to people, but it's also listening to, obviously, and talking and listening, more importantly, to them. But it's also spending a lot of time and seeing the core business going on and reflecting on that. But I suppose if you say, well, I'm going to come and see lots of lessons, people go, oh, because they think you're about to judge them. It's like, no, I'm genuinely just coming. I need to see how this place ticks. I think if I was going on as a new head, this is a top tip to new heads. You need to find out, you can ask people this, what is the thing that would make people most cross if I changed? And it's probably going to be something like the nativity play. It's not going to be the calculation policy. It's going to be, there'll be some touchstones. Like what would the thing that would make parents the most cross, who get the most grief from? What would make the staff, you know, the support? Yeah, in the school I was at, the support staff and Christmas, there was stuff about Christmas that was just sacred, not the Christian side of it, but just the other paraphernalia of, yeah, school photography. You know, it's things that like sort of there's things that are invested with value. It's bound to this direction. You know, I think I'm running a school to help kids learn. You think I'm providing something so that you can have lots of nice photographs and a nice disco, and you know, you've got this sort of memory of what a school should be, and that education is somehow tangential to that. Or, you know, the same with some of them. I mean, I'm parodying, but some staff, you know, it's about making sure that Christmas happens in a nice way. So that's again bad to direction. So yeah, and knowing what the destination, why we're here. So yeah, asking those questions and being prepared that some people are here for different reasons from what to that which you would assume they were there, you know. So yeah, that's not a neat plan. I think it really does depend. And I think the other thing I think when you move any job, and I've had this because at one point I was an executive head of, there's a school in Tower Hamlets that their head teacher left and they couldn't get a replacement. So for a couple of terms, I was head of 2 schools. And I think it's really easy when you're in a place, you've been there for a while and people know you and trust you and like you, and you know, and they're forgiving of you. They're forgiving of your little foibles because they like you, and they know you're basically on their side, and you know, but you don't take that trust with you. And that's not that people are horrible, but why should they trust you? They don't know you. You haven't got that in the bank, and they don't know how you're going to respond. And whether that was in this school or whether it was moving to Guernsey or things like that, people no, they don't know you, and therefore things that you might say as a little joke or something like that people, they don't get it, and they misinterpret you. And they're like, well, I'd never say that. Of course I don't mean that. So that was a joke. Like, yeah, maybe don't tell jokes, Claire. Note to self, be really careful early on with jokes, because it takes time to establish those relationships. And again, the bigger the organization, the longer it will take. And you can't, like I can't have a personal relationship with 8,000 well, obviously not with 8,000 children, but with however many staff we have. It's just impossible. But take your time, know that it's different. And there's all sorts of things. Talk about domain specific knowledge. There's also domain specific knowledge of the institution that you're in. Like really basic things, like you won't know how the photocopier works and you feel like an idiot. You think, oh, here I am, I've been brought in, I'm a leader, yay, I'm so amazing. And then you don't know how the photocopier works, and where the paper's kept, and you can't remember anyone's name, and there's just so much stuff you don't know, and you feel really stupid. And I think that's normal in a new job. You will feel stupid for a while because there's all sorts of nuts and bolts. Like you can't navigate the computer system. Like things that seem obvious. I remember being really frustrated with teachers like, where's this? It's like, well, it's on a shared drive, obviously. And now I like, oh no, my bad. Sorry, I get it. Actually, I'm still 3 years on, not always completely sure where things are saved, or where I can find. I mean, I'm much better now, obviously, but this policy or that policy.
I think you're going to save a lot of people a lot of hardship with that top tip, because I'm in the same category where I would cut the performances and things like that there, but I also realize that's not what you can't just go in and just go, okay, we're not going to do Christmas this year, and so I think there will be lots of other people in that situation, and I'm having flashbacks as you're talking, because it's really difficult to find the balance between sociability and your responsibility as leader, and it changes whether you're deputy or head. You have there's a different degree, the ratio is slightly different as well. And then I'm thinking back to my own career, and maybe it took me 2 or 3 goes to get that right in a new setting. First time in a new setting, there's probably 2 reserved, but then the next time I sort of had, okay, well, maybe I can pitch it a little bit further. And so I'm thinking back, what you're saying is ringing true, and I think it'll be really helpful for people as they go forward.
It's also it goes back to what I said about people's sense of self-esteem, and it's not personal. If I say that maths lesson or whatever, you could have done this differently and this differently, I'm not attacking you as a person. This is a problem solving. We've got to be solution focused and think about because we want the same things. We want the best for the children. And that means that we just have to be a bit dispassionate about this. This isn't about you. Some people take longer to get there than others on that.
I mean, that feeds perfectly into the next question. If there's anyone who's maybe resistant or reluctant to sort of move in the same direction as you in the school, what would your approach be to support them in sort of making that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to try and understand. I'm not saying I always do this as well as I should, by the way, but try and understand what the resistance is, like, where is it coming from? And also, when I talked about a vision and direction, that our choices about that are contestable. Like, basically the basic 2 choices are in a school, it's, and they're not in opposition, but they are in tension, and that's, academic, pastoral. And yeah, they're definitely not in opposition, but people will be weighted slightly more this side, that side. And all of our choices have a shadow side. Jungian psychology. So that the best and we might make a choice and think it's very moral and whatever like that, but there is a downside to it, whatever it is. So if we're really, really inclusive and we'd never exclude anyone, and we really care about all these children and all these children who've had trauma and everything like that, that's wonderful. there's a downside to that in terms of maybe the impact of other kids, maybe the impact on what we're expecting of staff. However, if we're like, no, I care about the other kids and I care about the staff and therefore then that has a downside. So there's not, that there are downsides, that we have to own that. Like we're not, it's too easy to think we're the good guys, these are the good guys, those are the bad guys over there. It's like, if you think about, God, early years and the whole thing about how polarized that gets, that yes, if you can be like, well, I really value play, well, there's a shadow side to that. But if you'd like, no, it's got to be more formal, well, there's a shadow side to that. So, you need to know that what you believe in, and that's fine, you can believe in it, but if people are against it, they're not doing it because they're probably, who knows, but generally, I've come across a few very strange people in my time, but generally they're doing it for a really heartfelt reason. So you need to, try and depersonalize it. Why they're not doing it to be irritating. Generally, I might feel like that. So understand, what is it? Is it actually values? Is it a clash of values? Because that's really hard. If it's a clash of values, you ain't gonna get anywhere. If people really, really, really fundamentally are much more on one end of the, if you call it, if I'm saying academic pastoral tension, that's a very loose way of putting it. But if they really, really, really are poles apart, then probably, it doesn't mean that you failed or they failed, but it's just probably not the right place for one of you. Probably has to go. They will be happier elsewhere, or you will be happier elsewhere. Or sometimes it's about you actually do absolutely have the same values, but you fundamentally believe in different routes to get there. So then it's about trying to explain, trying to argue from your evidence, being a bit humble about it, so listening to them, but ultimately saying, well, we're going to have to agree to differ. Like, I understand all of those things, and yeah, there are arguments about that. It's not that, you're not just making up some random stuff. There are arguments about that, but I think these arguments are stronger. You may disagree with me, but in the end of the day, this is what we're going to do. It's really easy to demonize people who think differently from you, and that's not helpful. When the DfE put something out, obviously now I work for the equivalent of a DfE, albeit on a tiny scale. But if I look on Twitter and see what England is doing, and they're, the DfE say they're going to do X, Y, or Z, and people are up in arms going, this is dreadful, it's terrible, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's helpful. Like, you have to think that, it might help vent, but I think, like, when somebody is saying to do something, I think it's what's better is to think, why are they saying it? What's the good they're trying to achieve? Because people aren't doing things for random reasons just to be sort of domineering or fickle. So what is it that they're trying to achieve, and why are they saying what they're doing? And then even if you disagree, it somehow makes it a bit bearable. Or you can say, well, okay, I can see that the end they want to achieve is this. And okay, so how can we tweak what they want? We're not going to do exactly quite like that, but we can do this, that it's sort of achieving the same end. Is this something that I've overlooked as important? So, for example, some people really anti the times table check, which we don't have in Guernsey, but you have in England. And some people, so I think that the reaction to be that is that, why are people saying this is important? And not to go, oh, it's rote learning, it's meaningless, la 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 la. Without, why are people thinking this is important? How is my approach meeting the things that they think is so important? That's a bad example, because obviously I think it's probably really important that kids know their times tables. I should have chosen a different example, which is one I'm less on side with.
Yeah, but it's not universal though. There are definitely people who would posit that children don't need to memorize their tables. They'll be fine without it. So I think the example works. Even if your own leaning doesn't quite match up with the stats you were sort of imagining you were taking. I think when I think about you do need a healthy amount of challenge. Because we can see in England what having yes men around you leads to. Total confusion, and disarray. And I think it's the same in schools. You need, you need those conversations in SLT meetings where people are talking about here are alternatives. For instance, in you talk about instructional coaching or coaching, well, there are maybe several different models you could choose. Why are we going to use this instead of that, and that kind of thing? I don't know.
And I mean, because I'm, I am one of a team. It's a much, you are genuinely in a team. You don't always get your own way. People contest things in a way that not so much when I was head teacher. And sometimes it's really annoying, but actually, at the time it's like, yeah. But actually a bit later, it's like, actually it's better. What we're doing now is actually better because of that challenge. So.
Yeah, I think that happens quite a lot. And I think your point about when your values don't align, I think teachers work far too hard, far too many hours to be somewhere where they're pushing in the complete opposite direction. Like you said, there will be schools where you are more happy because there's a million different ways we can do this job. You're not going to find two schools that are identical.
No, and do you know what? Sometimes, like I see people on Twitter that I probably don't agree with and would do things very differently. But actually, I think, do you know what, though? At least you've got a real vision and you've looked and you've got your own research that you're looking into. I might think, yeah, it's not the right research. No. But, at least you have a real vision and you're trying to do it and you're not doing this performative school improvement that's just trying to tick boxes and please somebody else. Like, you have a vision of how you want it to be and you're going that way. And there's an integrity to that and a passion to that. And that's probably why, it probably works to a degree. It's the people who are just doing this sort of performative, trying to please. We've got, what does Ofsted want? There was something on Twitter, and actually she unpicked it later, and it wasn't just as black and white as this, but she's like, there was today about, I'm thinking about using marking codes. Do you think Ofsted will like it? It's like, who cares whether Ofsted? That was completely the wrong question. I mean, one, they don't care. They don't care at all for a start. But, that's not why we do things. You need to, if you're going to use marking codes, it's because you think it's going to help children learn better in a way that's more effective and has less workload for teachers. That's why you would use them. But there, personally, I would do something else. But that's one way of doing it that you might want to do.
Yeah, I think we're quite a way off sort of getting over that psychological hurdle, that we were sort of funneled into in the mid thousands. I think, but I think every inspection I hear, colleagues go through, they seem positive and they seem to be taking, there's no one way to do things. There's no opposite. Back in the day, you learned to dance, you taught the way you were supposed to teach, and then your lesson was outstanding. But now it's actually, I think there's an expectation, thought will have gone into the why. So, I think that's promising, without alienating all those people who anti-Ofsted and happen to be listening. I think there's a place for external validation, but we're not, it's not.
Well, let me tell you a story about that. Back in the day, before Ofsted, which obviously I remember, probably lots of people here are far too young to remember that. But my brother was a teacher, a secondary school teacher, and he was teaching English. And the head of English said, well, English is about communication. So if children are wearing their, what they call Walkmans, do you remember? You're probably too old you're young for Walkmans, but back in the day, before iPhones, Walkmans, if they're on their Walkmans listening to music or whatever, that's communication, so that's fine. Can you imagine? It doesn't matter if they're not listening to my lesson, it's because English is about communication. That is why we need Ofsted. Like before Ofsted, honestly, it was so bad. Like, people did really, really, really terrible stuff, and that's why. And that, I think that's, and when you talk to Ofsted inspectors, they'll say, yeah, but you haven't seen what I've seen. Like, if you're a reasonable school, it feels like disproportionate, but actually we need people looking in and checking, and it isn't, because there are people out there who are doing some really not good stuff.
Thousands of teachers and leaders take inspiration from your work. Where do you go for your sources of inspiration, and how do you ensure that your own professional development is tended to? Because if you're, like you said, talking at research ed or doing, many of the different things that you sort of do in what would appear your spare time, how do you make sure that your professional development keeps ticking over as well?
Well, I think that Research Ed is, I mean, yeah, I speak at it sometimes, but I also go to all the other people's talks. I'm only talking for one slot. So that's been brilliant. That's really, really, really helped me. And I've heard some wonderful people. There's the obvious, well, obvious to me, big names, whether it's Daisy Christodoulou or Oliver Caviglioli or Tom Sherrington or, Pep Sapri I've talked about, all of those people that, Sonia Thompson, Andy Percival. So all of those people. Twitter, I know Twitter is derided sometimes, but just ignore the rubbish. That's what I say with Twitter. If people are in some random argument about nothing, just scroll on by and just don't get involved. Or get involved if you want to, but know that why you're getting involved. But yeah, actually Twitter has been brilliant. It's just people put links up to things and you read things and you read another thing, and yeah, I've learned so much. That probably Twitter's been the biggest thing that has shaped me, exposing me to so many viewpoints. And also, of course, I mean, Research Ed, what you're going to get. I mean, it's not as monolithic as some people might think it is, but there's a certain take on things you're going to get. But the thing about Twitter is you get all sorts of stuff, and I follow loads of different people and read lots of different things, and some of the takes are like, don't know if I necessarily agree with that, or again it's like, well, I might agree with some of that. So challenging yourself and not always staying within the same echo chamber. So yeah, loads and loads of blogs, and then from that you might actually read a whole book, not just a blog occasionally. Podcasts like this one, or loads of other ones. My mind's gone blank now as to all the other ones that are out there. I have to say, there's one thing about moving to Guernsey, because I'm not great at listening to podcasts unless I'm doing something. Like, I'm one of those people who, like, lots of people say that. So I'm like, I used to listen to them a lot when I drove, but Guernsey's too small. You're never going very far in the car. So, you haven't got time to listen to a podcast. So I listen to them less since I've moved over here. That is to say. Whereas I used to be able to listen to one, journey to work, journey from work, done.
Yeah, I remember when I started listening to Craig Barton's podcast, and I'd be driving maybe 40 minutes one direction, 40 minutes back. And over the course of maybe 5 days, would finish one of his episodes.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yeah, Craig. Yeah, that's one of the key ones, isn't it? I'm just trying to think of all that. There's so much out there now. So much out there you can listen to.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic's definitely made it a lot easier for us to access the technology necessary to make this kind of content. I think it can only be a good thing, because you get people thinking about their practice and their craft and sharing it with other people. I try and listen to podcasts when I'm doing tasks that don't require all of my attention. So if I'm doing maybe some sort of spreadsheet, and maybe not the check-in part of doing the spreadsheet, but the manual input.
Spreadsheet I would need to concentrate, but cooking, ironing, not that I iron much, that's why I don't listen to podcasts very much anymore, because I hate ironing. But those sort of things.
Yeah, I've got the dishes. We don't have a dishwasher. I've got the dishes manually, so that's a good half hour every night. Some other activity too. Over the course of your career, how have your opinions on leadership changed, if at all?
And you know what? I talked earlier about I went to the leadership program for serving head teachers ages ago, and that was really pivotal, because up until then, I was like, I had a weird journey into headship. I was sort of thrown into it, and I just sort of did it, and not in a very reflective way, to be honest. And that was the first time I'd really thought about it properly. And so that was really, really helpful for me, and really profound. And I think the other thing was, I didn't have the words to articulate it then, but I talked about this time when relatively early in my headship career, when there was this big crisis and all the teachers got pregnant. So obviously then that was more of an emotional view of headship. Like, it was less intellectual, but my motives for doing it changed, I suppose. So there was that, and then later on the leadership program for serving head teachers, and Daniel Goldman's thing on leadership, that was really, really, really useful.
Yeah.
And I suppose later on, after that, all the stuff that's come out in the last 5 years or so about domain specific leadership, as opposed to generic leadership styles. That's been really useful and really helpful, I think.
Yes, it's almost it's hard to tell. It feels like the journey was meant to happen the way it happened because you are where you are, doesn't it? But actually, probably if you listen back and you think about the different points you're describing, you can see how, you probably think, oh, it could have gone that way, it could have gone that way, but actually, here we are here. Yeah, and it's being reflective and thinking, I think makes a big difference. If you were only able to give leaders and aspiring leaders one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm going to say two things, like know yourself while you're doing it, but also that whole thing about it's not about looking good, it's about genuinely being good.
I think that's going to be really, really useful, because it is a big shift to move towards, and if I can think of an example from us, whenever I take people around our school, I know they're going to see really good maths teaching because we've spent the last 5 years sort of embedding the practice that we value. Obviously it's very subjective, but this is what we think is beneficial to our pupils. But I know that it's not a song and dance, and you have to know what you're looking for to see the excellence in it. And I think that's tough because you almost need to be really resolute in that what you've done and the stuff what's happening, that it's the right thing for your pupils. I think that can be a big shift.
Yeah. And also some people don't necessarily see it. They go, oh, I do that. And you think, yeah, you don't really. Like you might do an echo of that, but you don't really do that because you're doing sort of a surface little bit of that. You haven't really embraced the whole of it. So it's got this veneer of performing it again. There was something really interesting again on Twitter from somebody a way back, not that long ago, but she's talked about, you've got three sort of groups of people. You've got those who not generally beginning teachers, but not always, who know that they've got lots to learn, know that they're not there yet, they're not on a finished item, or there might be teachers who are more experienced but know that things aren't great, but really, really want to get better, and they're very receptive. And then you might have some teachers who are really, really, really good at what they do and really secure in their self, and therefore they're not threatened if they see a different way of doing things. They're like, oh, that's interesting, and they can learn because they're interested. They don't feel, they're not defensive about it, and they're open to new ideas. And then you have people whose egos are very bound up with what they do, and therefore, and they've probably been teaching a few years, and so forth. They think that it's too threatening to think that what they might be doing could be different, and therefore and they see, if you said, well, have you thought of doing it like this? They become very defensive and are you saying I'm no good? And it's like, no, but we can all be better, can't we? So that sort of people who are not out and out resistant to change, I mean, not sort of belligerent, but just who think that they're sort of done.
Yeah, completed it.
And actually, they could be so much better. Like, because we can all be so much better.
I mean, I'm not 100% certain where psychologists stand on the Dunning-Kruger anymore, because I know that for a while it was, very much a case of, okay, this is a psychological phenomenon, but recently people have been pushing back against it. But I do think I remember being maybe 4 or 5 years in and thinking I'd mastered teaching, and then maybe reading David Dowd's "What If Everything You Knew About Education Was Wrong," and then going, oh my goodness, there's so much I don't know. And that was, I think you do need to go through that phase, perhaps, because once you get halfway competent, you almost get too big for your boots, and then
And like, it's okay not to know. It's okay not to be perfect. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Like, none of us know it all, and we can all improve.
Absolutely. What does the future hold, Claire, in terms of your output? Are you coming to the national conference? Have you any more books in the pipeline? I know we didn't prep for this question, but I want to
Okay, well, I mean, National Conference as in Research Ed, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, well, do you know what? There's on my list, my to-do list, is I need to apply to be a speaker. So yeah, I'm taking a load of people from Guernsey over. So I'm coming one way or the other, but I hope I'm coming to speak, but also as a punter. So yeah, I'm coming. Books, oh, do you know, I'm meant to be writing, you know, Craig Barton, like everything. Yeah, How I Wish I Taught Maths. I'm meant to be writing a book called How I Wish I'd Taught Reading. Yeah, and it's not going very well, as in, like, I'm just so busy, I don't have time to do it. So I've written about a page and a half, I think, and that's in about a year and a half. So yeah, I'm going to be like 326 before it's actually ever written. So I don't know if it will actually ever get written, but that would be great to do. I don't know, I think Chris Such has sort of cornered the market on that, so maybe his book is so good. Maybe it's not needed anymore. But anyway, I would like to be able to do that. Yeah, like even my blog outputs, I've done 2 in 3 years. So just life is busy. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, when you've moved to a different part of the world, you know, maybe not miles away, but definitely, you know, those moves, you know, new sort of challenge, you know. So I think, you know, it's more than acceptable. You know, you don't need to explain the way. But yeah, I'm sure people are really looking forward to seeing you in at the national conference. So all I said to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And I think we could have gone for longer. I think I might melt if we do go on for longer.